Thorsten's already mentioned the title of my talk, and I'm delighted to be able to give this talk to you because it's very much centered on what we are doing in CervCollab to talk about scholarly activism. So in this talk, I'm going to be offering you multiple ideas that I think might help any business scholar. So here is the set of topics I have for you. There's 7 topics, starting with just a brief overview of what CervCollab is, because I realize not everyone in the audience knows. Then the need for wise scholarly activism, redesigning the institution's framing business research, designing for collaborative wisdom, designing for human experience and inclusion, CervCollab service research themes, and the last one is next steps for scholarly activism. You can see our website there in this shot also. And the person in the picture is Martin Luther King, a very famous activist from the 1960s, one of the many heroes of my childhood. So first, what is CervCollab? Our perspective was launched in 2020 in an introductory article. Now, I got the idea for CervCollab and announced it in 2018, but I only knew that I wanted to start the group, but I didn't know what we were going to be. I formed an advisor group that wrote the article you can see here with me. The title is Elevating the Human Experience Through Service Research Collaborations, Introducing CervCollab. And you can see Thorsten Gruber's name right in the center of that. The other co-authors with me include marketing scholars, include a management scholar, Dave Bowen, and include Leah Patricio, an engineering scholar. And this really set the foundations for building the conceptual scaffolding for what we decided to call elevating the human experience. And I'm going to continue with that theme of elevating the human experience throughout what I say today. And it was published in the Journal of Service Management, obviously now 4 years ago, going on 5. So to give you a quick sense of a few other key aspects, our name itself is a contraction of serving humanity through collaboration. And serving humanity is therefore our purpose. And through collaboration is the process we pursue to achieve that purpose. And it's based on transformative service research. Transformative research was launched in the year of 2011, and it was focused on improving well-being. I should mention I was part of that group that helped launch that. In the article in 2020, we had 4 human interactions that we described in a spreadsheet form, from conflict to collaboration. A couple of years after we did that article, I began to realize that maybe we hadn't quite portrayed it in the way we meant it. So now I've got it shown in this slide as a hierarchy of human interactions, not a list of interactions, but a hierarchy going from the bottom at conflict, up to competition, over to cooperation, and then up to the highest level of collaboration. And notice that dashed line for shared purpose. Only collaboration has that as the interaction context. Conflict is certainly not shared purpose, neither is competition. And cooperation starts to have some shared purpose, but it's frequently situations where a boss is telling employees what to do. Not really the same thing as what we mean by shared purpose. Shared purpose is hard for us as humans, but I think this is where we need to go. So not long ago, we upframed our mission. In green, you can see the new part, but I'm going to go through the whole mission with you because the mission was an essential part of what we wrote in 2020. We said to serve humanity through research collaborations that catalyze reducing suffering, improving well-being, and enabling well-becoming. Now, we added this last part as a result of discussions I'd had with many people by the time we added it 2 years ago now. And the idea was that maybe we weren't trying to reach high enough. We said elevating the human experience. Maybe well-being is not enough, because well-being sort of sounds like now. What about the future? And that's where enabling well-becoming came in. When I first researched the idea of well-becoming, the only place I found it in scholarly literature was in education. Educators were talking about the well-becoming of students. So to me, that made some sense. So on to the need for wise scholarly activism then. And I should emphasize that CervCollab is very much trying to be a wise scholarly activist organization. But first, what is scholarly activism? It's applying academic research and expertise to actively advocate for social change. And this involves research with a purpose, and I've already told you our purpose of serving humanity, public engagement, collaborative approaches, and advocating for change through academia. So it is very much embedded inside the scholarly process. But I left out the part, what is the wise part of scholarly activism? And for that, I have to bring in a wonderful idea from a scholar from the University College London. He's now an emeritus reader, Nicholas Maxwell. In 1984, he published the first edition of the book called From Knowledge to Wisdom, and the image there is his second edition that was published in 2007. From 1984 onward, he was writing about a philosophy of wisdom logic for universities. So he's a philosopher of science, so it's not like he's dabbling in philosophy. That's his whole career, his whole life. And here's a quote from 2007: "We need to bring about a major intellectual and institutional revolution in the aims and methods of inquiry, from knowledge inquiry to wisdom inquiry." Now, when I discovered this about 2 years ago, it was sort of, oh, wow, I wish I had found this in '84. It would have helped me think through many of the things that I've worked on across my career. But it's better to find it at all than to never find it. So I'm really happy we found it, and I'm going to be framing much of what I tell you in the rest of this talk off of Maxwell's higher logic. It fits with elevating the human experience. So what did he say wisdom is? In his written records, he repeatedly calls it wisdom's being understood to be the capacity to realize what is of value in life for oneself and others. Now, a different philosopher of science that has very much in harmony with Maxwell says that practical wisdom is decision-making in service of human flourishing. So certainly very consistent with what we've been trying to do in Serve Collab, which is part of the reason I was so enthusiastic about it. But it's not foreign to us in business schools. Here are some calls for wisdom in business schools. The ACSB International, and of course your university, your business school is accredited by ACSB. The guiding principle number 2 on societal impact, I'm going to focus on the green part, a force for good in society and makes a positive contribution to society. That sure sounds a lot like what Maxwell and Nussbaum said. And then the responsible research in business and management group, the last part of what they say is improve the lives of people in our society. So both of those groups are asking business schools to reach higher. Wisdom, I think, is where we need to go. Now, you probably have seen this hierarchy from data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. I was first taught this in the early 70s when I went off to college. Now, data and information are modern ideas. I don't think that's actually the right way to describe humans. So here is what I think makes more sense if we're going to describe humans. From ignorance to knowledge to wisdom. So in the context of Serve Collab, I'm arguing that elevating the human experience means that we need to help people escape ignorance to reach knowledge, but knowledge is not enough. Just like Maxwell said, we need to reach wisdom. And this is a link back to that I've framed mission statement, because ignorance, I would argue, is suffering. Now, the problem with ignorance is that people don't always realize they're suffering from ignorance. That's an interesting part of the process. The well-being issue is the knowledge stage that Maxwell is so critical about with in all of his career. The top level we're matching while becoming with wisdom. The wisdom helps us become what we should be, and we need more wisdom. So let's go back to ignorance, though, because ignorance is the natural condition of every child. We all know that. We don't know how to walk. We don't know how to talk. We barely can breathe at first, and we have to acquire those skills and abilities. But we start remarkably ignorant versus any other mammal. And education and extended childhoods are how we cope with our ignorance. Education is, of course, why people like you and the audience and me as an educator got into what we did, for the opportunity to help people escape the ignorance of childhood, to learn in university settings. And extended childhoods are part of what we do as humans, too. We have the most extended childhoods of any mammals. And this is how we cope with our ignorance. It's actually a marvelous thing that we're ignorant, but only if we use it wisely. We are not using it wisely. So education, we could say, is an investment in human potential. And that's, to me, one of the greatest things about all the time I got to teach students, that helping them reach for and improve their human potential. So we know today, with all of our modern technology, that knowledge is easy to share today, and I'm certainly able to use this technology as I talk to you all the way across the Atlantic today. But ignorance is easier to share too, which undermines progress. Look at what social media has done to the modern human systems. Social media has undermined country after country. And I won't go into those details, but you understand what I'm talking about. But wisdom itself is still difficult to share. It is much harder to fully understand and embrace wisdom than it is to embrace conspiracy theories and nonsense that actually bring people down from knowledge. We need to find ways of overcoming new forms of ignorance, and better to overcome just knowledge to reach to the wisdom of knowing what to do with the knowledge. But let me give you an example of how bad we are as a species at understanding wisdom. Here's a picture from my childhood, 1968. I was 15 barely at that point. It's December of 1968. It's known as Earthrise as a photo today. Astronauts circling the moon took a photo of that blue marble, as it sometimes has been called later, Earth from space. The first photo of Earth from space. It became metaphorically a spaceship Earth label. So it was the first time we as a species could see ourselves. Every human who had ever been born had lived on that fragile-looking little blue marble out in the darkness of space. But we didn't really become as wise as we might have. It did launch Earth Day and other very environmental movements. A lot of things happened, but not enough. And let me prove that to you with this slide. Oops, backwards. Let's go forwards. There we go. This slide is a slide showing average temperature rise since 1850, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So you see that right about 1975, on that 25-year mark cycle there, 1975, the average temperature started climbing faster. Now, if we were a wise species, the average temperature would have at least not kept climbing higher and higher, but it did. The problems we have now with all of these climate crisis issues are because we didn't realize that we were cooking ourselves on that blue marble that we all are sitting on today. So why didn't 1968 transform us? There was a lack of wisdom, clearly. And here is, I think, the excellent summary of the problem. It's a quote from E.O. Wilson, a sociobiologist. The real problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions, ancient emotions that were in all of us. We have medieval institutions, and by the way, in case it's not obvious, universities are medieval institutions, started in medieval times, the first of them. And godlike technologies, the kind of technologies that can allow astronauts to circle the moon and take pictures from space, etc. So our technology far outpaces our emotional states, and our institutions are frequently not as adept at helping us. And part of that is the lack of wisdom in the universities that Maxwell focused on. So that gets to redesigning the institutions and framing business research slightly differently if we can. So I need to clarify what institutions are. And this is a key idea that comes out of the service dominant logic topic. This is part of the many service research areas that I've worked in. So according to service dominant logic, institutions are humanly devised rules, norms, and beliefs that enable and constrain action and make social life predictable and meaningful. So rules, norms, and beliefs. Note that none of those things actually have a physicality to them. They live in our minds because we believe they exist. We are able to create things that exist only in our minds and act accordingly. It's a fascinating thing about us as a species. And they include metaphors, languages, stories, myths, rituals, perspectives, ideas, cultures, laws, money, traditions, service systems, etc. Inventions that we use in our minds. And service researchers like me are particularly interested in service systems. So I'm going to be saying more about that as I go into my talk. But let me come back to that one I had in green on metaphors, a little more on metaphors. Our ordinary conceptual system, this is a quote from a book by Metaphors We Live By, is fundamentally metaphorical in nature. Our concept structure, what we perceive, how we get around in the world, and how we relate to other people. So we live with metaphors that are helping drive in our behaviors. And I'm convinced that a huge part of our problem are extractive metaphors that still dominate much of human thought. One of them that I'm very familiar with because I'm from out west, I was born in Arizona, lived in much of the western states most of my life. Conquering nature is part of the story. I mean, I spent 9 years in Phoenix, and there is no reason for the fastest growing city in America to be in Phoenix. It's conquering nature. There's not enough water for that many people. It's a winning the West logic. It's a very extractive logic The Colorado River is the main source of water for that area. It doesn't make a lot of sense. On shareholder value, one that is much more specific than the first I just gave you, is one that has undermined corporations, not all corporations, but many corporations, by focusing too much on just the shareholder returns as an organization's primary objective and neglecting other aspects. You can really mistreat customers if you focus on shareholder returns first. So I'm convinced, and this is part of the circular purpose, we need service metaphors that liberate human thought to get us out of the traps that are causing us to get into arguments and conflicts with each other. One of them is serving each other, generously helping each other. Now that one hopefully sort of seems familiar to you. One of the very common framings for such an idea is known as the golden rule. You can find that same sort of logic across multiple cultures, multiple religions, of how we treat each other. It's an ancient idea of how we treat each other. Serving it forward is also an ancient idea of serving the next generations. Many indigenous cultures talk about the 7th generation. Families have children partly so that there will be next generations, and they're serving their children's needs because that's what humans do. We aren't focusing enough on those sides of life. We're focusing too much on extraction and not enough on service. So here's 2 examples of what to redesign then. Service systems, as I've already mentioned, are a key idea. So what if business schools were more than just business schools? What if we were organization schools? So we not just corporations, we could include nonprofits, we could include any organizations. The concepts and ideas that we apply to businesses, I think, can be adapted to the context of any other human organization. And they need to be adapted. There can never be a one-size-fits-all. But we could be thinking bigger, and I think we should think bigger. And money is too often used to mistreat people and exploit people. What if money could be rethought of as if it was managed like water resources? Now, I just talked about how water resources are often mismanaged. So it's not like water is properly managed by humans either. But the key is too often systems around the world are designed to keep some people poor. And is that really the best we can do? Is that really wise? Now, one last idea here on institutions, explore B corporations is my last point to you. My last 2 years of teaching, I was teaching my students about B corporations and having them do hypothetical B corporation projects. B corporations are required to balance purpose and profit. They're required to think about the impact of their decisions on their workers, customers, suppliers, community, and the environment. And the B is for benefit. There's the web link, and again, I'll give you all these slides later. 2 years ago, the last time I checked, the UK had about 1,400 and some B corporations in the UK. Now it's more than 3,000. B corporations are spreading all over the world. There are many very large ones, but a lot of them are very small. I think it's a better model because it includes more of the human system as opposed to just shareholders or just owners, etc. So on to designing for collaborative wisdom then. Now this I'm referring back to an article that is a very recent article that we published as a CERB perspective article. Our title is Cultivating Wiser Service Systems Through Communication. I'm one of 5 co-authors there. 2 of them are marketing professors and 2 are management professors. And I'm the old timer in the group as the service scholar from the 20th century and still active this century. So in that article, we focused on 4 major service research threads that emerged and converged in this century, in the 21st century. Service dominant logic emerged in 2004. Service science emerged almost exactly the same time in the early part of this century. Service design had an earlier start in the previous century, but really took off in this century. And then transforming service research, I've already mentioned, approximately 2011. So if you look at those together and look at the things that they have in common, each challenged previous thinking about the nature of service itself, the nature of exchange, the scope of service, the design of service, and purpose of service research. Now, I have participated primarily in the last 2, service design and transformative service research, but let me focus a little more on how these things are interwoven. They converge from the perspective of profound generalizability as they climb the ladder of service system complexity. And these ideas, I think are very relevant to all business scholars because of that generalizability. The SD logic views all human interactions as service interactions. So whether it's paid work or unpaid work, It's a service interaction according to SD logic. I believe completely in that. It makes perfect sense. And it gets rid of a blocking mental logic if we don't think about it that way. Second, service science views all human organizations as service systems. In other words, the organizations are serving human needs. Makes sense to me as well. Third one, service design views all service systems and their interactions as opportunities for service redesign or new service design. So we can change it, in other words, in service design. And the work I've been able to do with colleagues has been a lot of fun to help change things. So to summarize on transformative service research builds on the three previous threads and adopts a scholarly activist perspective to solve complex problems in human service systems by advocating, and you've already heard me say these before, advocating reducing suffering, improving well-being, and enabling well-becoming. So here's Sir Kolev's synthesis of these ideas from our article. It's in the article. That humanity has always lived in service systems from the most ancient of times. The earliest service systems are families. But many service systems are not serving humanity well. Emperors, kings, and all these other systems are not serving humanity well. Many corporations are not serving humanity well. We should design service systems that serve humanity wisely. Again, that word wisely. What can we do to make them wiser? To add one other key aspect on wisdom here, that we can think of wisdom as at three levels, and it needs to be nurtured at three levels. So there's personal wisdom, and much of the literature that my colleagues and I looked at was about personal wisdom. Isn't it great to be wiser? And yes, it is, but that doesn't fix human problems. Then there's the social wisdom. That's the wisdom about how do we organize our nation, how do we organize our city, how do we organize a corporation. That's the social level. And then there's the external wisdom. How do we interact with nature? The social wisdom is the greatest challenge because the way we organize at the social level affects how people are treated at the personal level. It affects how the external environment is treated. Social wisdom is essential. And of course, that's not a shock. We're a social species, but we aren't a wise social species yet. Now, on to designing for human experience and inclusion. Now, in that title framing for our first article, we were talking about human experience. That was a novelty, a new idea for the service research field. This is how we defined it. To serve humanity, Sir Kolev seeks to elevate the human experience, which is our holistic concept for the totality of each person's experience with service systems as they seek to meet their basic needs across their life journey. We were trying to think really big with this. And I have to say, this definition, every year I share this definition with people. I'm very proud that our group in 2020 wrote it together. So let's look a little more at the complexity of human service ecosystems, because this is one of the problems that universities get into that I'm showing you now. On the left side, social service systems, they tend to look at social roles. Now, when I was a college student, I was very interested in sociology and psychology. And I took classes in those things, and they wouldn't talk about monetary anything. They wanted to study the things that didn't have anything to do with money. They thought money is dirty. And then in the business school classes I took, because I have 3 degrees all in marketing, that it was a focus on monetary this, monetary that, and not much interest in the non-monetary. But it's the same humans. We're studying parts. It's like only being an expert on the left hand or only being an expert on the right hand, but not realizing those hands are connected to the same human. Disciplines get in the way of progress, I'm convinced. The disciplines are ancient medieval institutions. And many of them started later, but they followed and imitated the medieval process. Roles are the essential context of human service systems. We change roles constantly in our lives. All of us go through social and economic roles in a typical day. We need to think bigger, because if we think bigger, we can become wiser. Now, the topic of service inclusion is an idea that I wrote with several co-authors back in 2018. And it was one of the inspirations to me in that year for starting CERCO, because it was published in 2018. So we define it as an egalitarian system that provides customers with fair access to service, fair treatment during a service, and fair opportunity to exit. And we got to that topic because we were looking at the issues of transformative service research. And the question we all agreed on and that we would focus on was, where should we start in transformative service research if we want to make the biggest impact? And after a couple hours of discussion, looking at all the topics, we agreed it was service inclusion because many, many services are designed to exclude some people. And we just thought that is where the right spot is to start. So not long after the formation of CertCollab, I had the opportunity to get involved in a project on the digital divide. And that one we took a inclusion lens too, and we published it last year in the Journal of Service Research. This is a figure from the diagram, and we looked at phases of healing the digital divide. We deliberately used the word healing because we were convinced that it's not that what most of the prior literature says is the problem. A lot of literature says, well, they need the technology. That's the beginning stage, according to us. People with the technology still don't know how to use it, so they need access, they need capabilities, they need the ability to actually do things with it to foster their own happiness. And that's a very quick take on that article. Now, one last article to share with you on this general area. This one is only a few weeks old. The title of the article I did with Marek Nusowski, Elevating the Human Experience Through Service Standards, Insights from the Global Refugee Crisis. So you can see a diagram there showing a crane with diversity, dignity, and agency, building the crane up, all to improve refugee experiences. And here's the three definitions we had for those three things that we call the ADS framework. Starting with agency, the capability of individuals to think independently and make choices, so that services should serve everyone's agency, and that each person has their own sense of agency. Dignity, a commonwealth of individually assessed well-being, that everyone has their own sense of dignity and they have a right to that sense of dignity. And third, diversity, the full spectrum of individual human differences. In the modern world today, there are lots of arguments about who should be served and who shouldn't be served. We think there's only one planet with life on it. There's only one species known as Homo sapiens, even though the name seems an exaggeration. The species is mistreating each other, and refugees are often mistreated. That's why we focus on refugees in that article. Again, hot off the press. Now, on to service research themes, which is also a 2024 activity that we published 8 different articles, CertCollab articles in the Journal of Services Marketing. I'm going to show you more about those very briefly in this section. So what I've got here for you is the previous United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that they launched in 2015, 17 different goals. As I was working with Rebecca Russell Bennett on the possible idea for CertCollab to do something about Sustainable Development Goals in the Journal of Services Marketing, Rebecca and I started pondering the idea, what if there was a way to compress these ideas into a more effective framing for the purposes of service research and other researchers? So we did that. We came up with these 7 themes. So from 17 to 7, we compressed several into what we call well-being. We compressed another set into opportunity. We compressed a third set into resources, a fourth into economics, a fifth into institutions. 6 was the planet itself, and 7 was collaboration. Now there's, in the Journal of Services Marketing, then, an article about each of these, looking at any prior research we could find, the authors that wrote all these various articles could find about those topic areas, and calling for more research in these areas. So there's a lot of opportunity for any of you in the audience that might find one of these topic areas of interest. And on the back of these slides that I'm going to be sharing with you are the references to all these articles. I won't go through those today, but they're on the back of these slides that Thorsten's going to have after. And actually, he's already got them. So next steps for scholarly activism, to wrap up my talk with you. I've shown you a human hierarchy of progress from ignorance to knowledge to wisdom. And Maxwell argues, and I fully believe, that we are stuck as a species at the knowledge level. We are not actually Homo sapiens yet. We called ourselves that, but we aren't. We have not achieved the wisdom of serving humanity. We're great at serving some people. We have the highest level of human wealth ever. And boy, is that wonderful for the few people that have it. We also have lots of people dying in conflicts around the world. Now, sure, it's not as bad as some of the horrors of the 20th century, but is that a ruler we should use? No, I don't think so. It wouldn't be wise if conflict is still so frequent around the world, or poverty, or starvation. Look at the starvation problems in Gaza, starvation problems in Somalia. These things shouldn't be happening if we were a wise species. So we have to get past ignorance to knowledge, but past knowledge to wisdom. Knowledge is simply not enough. And I agree completely with Maxwell. That's how academia has gotten stuck. Universities have gotten stuck focusing on what he calls knowledge inquiry when we should have been focusing on wisdom inquiry. So this next slide shows you what I think we as scholars can do to try to change things. On the bottom, you can see the role of scholars and the connection between ignorance and knowledge, of trying to cure ignorance. I would often tell my colleagues when I would head off to class, I'm out to cure some ignorance today. And I meant that because that's part of what made teaching so much fun, to help students learn things. But the challenge for going beyond knowledge to wisdom is to find the ways to do the right research to enable the wisdom that actually solves the real serious problems that we are in. If we were the wise species that I was emphasizing in '68, none of the problems I'm talking about would exist. We would have fixed all these things because we're such a wise species. I think wisdom is within us. We are capable of marvelous things when we work together. And business schools are well positioned to expand their role in their research. Business disciplines have more in common than other groups, such as liberal arts or sciences. And they share some medieval characteristics like any part of the universities in terms of castle walls. Well, this is our discipline, and there's sort of limited connections between disciplines. I think we need to try to reach across the various business disciplines as well as reach beyond business thinking and focus on wisdom of serving humanity. Business research tends to focus on improving business systems and business practices. I think we can take that improvement logic and it can be expanded to human needs, to human systems, and the living planet. We can do more to help our fellow species, and we should do more to help our fellow species. And if we do all those things, scholarly activism and business school research would, if we take all those things I just showed you, all 7 of those, it would help us choose topics that serve humanity, not just shareholders. And you could collaborate with almost anybody in your school, in your community, in the country, or in the world to accomplish more than you might do if you just stay just within your own discipline or just with your usual colleagues. One of the first things I think in terms of activism is to reach further, to reach for more opportunities. And together you can pursue a collaborative wisdom research project that serves humanity. I need to do a pitch for a new journal. Rebecca Russell Bennett, who I mentioned with the Journal of Services Marketing, she left the editorship of that after her term was up and started this new journal of social impact and business research. It was launched just in the middle of this year, 2024. As part of CERT efforts, we endorsed it. It's an open access journal until 2025. You can see in that slide, she quotes from the AACSB's standards on meaningful and discernible change for the betterment of people. Again, a wisdom framing. So I encourage you to think about that new journal. And I realize that for lots of academics, they're afraid to get into new journals. I encourage you to think about the possibilities of helping frame the future of social impact in business by being an early scholar in that journal. That's exactly what I think a lot of us need to do. If scholars can see the problem before the public can, I think we have a duty as humans to act. I mean, to me, that's essentially why I became a professor. I saw problems in '68 that upset me tremendously. And I got into academia because I thought academia was a place where I could help change things. And marketing, because it was a persuasive field, very much appealed to me because I wanted to help persuade people to do better things. If we can see a problem, again, I think we have a duty as humans to act. Here are the various ways of getting involved with CERT. If something I've told you causes you to be more interested, you can join for free. We don't charge anybody anything because we're actually not a membership organization. We are a human services nonprofit. There are opportunities to volunteer. There's a link to our published research, how to communicate with us on the various social media. You can see Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube there. And I'll be putting the video I'm doing today on there. And there's my email address. And the last slide here is to thank you and serve it forward. And if you can scan that QR code if you want to get the direct link to CERT as well. I'm delighted to give this presentation. I'm going to stop this camera and switch over to the regular camera to continue there. So I'll do that in just